Hello, my lovely anatomists and physiologists. Michele Glass here. We are wrapping up our discussion of the central nervous system here by looking at, again, those protections to the CNS. Of course, that means brain and spinal cord. And we're looking specifically at the cerebrospinal fluid, which we can abbreviate CSF. So let's try to answer some of these questions about the CSF. So what actually is the cerebrospinal fluid? It's going to be fluid that's created from the blood. So fluid that's created from the blood, and it's going to include water. It's going to include small molecules. So nutrients, that's like glucose and amino acids. Is going to have electrolytes, which that's always our code for ions. And it's going to have gases. So it's going to have dissolved both oxygen gas and carbon dioxide gas. It's going to be found in brain ventricles. It's going to be found in the central canal of the spinal cord. And it's going to be found in the subarachnoid space. And it's being made then, it's made in the brain ventricles at what's called the choroid plexus. We're going to go through all of this together in our lab by ependymal cells, which we introduced early on as one of our types of neuroglia cells or glial cells. And when we're looking at our brain ventricles, that's this picture that we have in the little corner here. So brain ventricle are actually spaces in the brain where CSF is made. And you have 4, and you name them based on that, basically. So if we zoom in, I think we can change our label color a little bit. You're going to have 2 lateral . You're going to have 2 lateral ventricles. And y'all, these are going to be located in the left and the right hemisphere of the cerebrum. And then you have the 3rd ventricle, which, remember, is inside the diencephalon. It's inside the diencephalon. And then we have the 4th ventricle, which is back behind the pons and the medulla oblongata. And so I like to think about the ventricular system as like a series of lakes and rivers. So the ventricles are like those lakes or these big bodies of fluid, right? So they're literally spaces in the brain. So in this particular model, what we're seeing is it's as if those fluids were solidified and then all the brain tissue was broken off. So we see lateral ventricles side by side. These would be positioned again in the left and the right hemispheres of the cerebrum. And then coming together at the middle, we have the 3rd ventricle where the diencephalon is going to wrap around that. And then we do have this connecting like river that's going through the midbrain. It has a few names. We can call it the aqueduct of midbrain. So we'll use that terminology right here. And that's like a river then that's connecting that 3rd ventricle to the 4th. And the 4th we really see back behind the pons and medulla oblongata. And then what we see is the fourth ventricle becomes continuous with the central canal in the spinal cord. And so this is the location where we're making that CSF. Now, the actual where in the ventricle, again, is the choroid plexus. And the choroid plexus then would be these ependymal cells and capillary. So this is one place where you do not see the blood-brain barrier right here. So we will say it lacks we're calling it the blood-brain barrier or the BBB. And so it's the job of these ependymal cells to make and then circulate, so keep it moving, the CSF. And what we see it doing is circulating, excuse me. We see that it circulates around, and I'm going to say in within, I probably should have said within and around the CNS. You know, and this is a pattern we saw with synovial fluid. This is an area where we don't want to reduce the amount of neural tissue in order to have the blood vessels, but the neural tissue is alive. It needs glucose to make ATP. It needs amino acids to build those neurotransmitters, right? It needs oxygen for sure. And so we have living cells that have all of the needs that all living cells need: nutrients, oxygen, and waste removal. And so we see that that's the job of the CSF. So it's going to remove metabolic waste. And we're seeing it provide nutrients and oxygen to our living cells. We see that we're producing about 500 milliliters per day. And so this is something that's constantly being produced, and then through the veins, it's being removed. So you're constantly removing the waste and replenishing the fluid in order to keep this tissue alive. We also see it acting as a cushion. So our brain and our spinal cord both are hanging out completely suspended in this fluid. So that's another like shock absorber or cushion for this very sensitive, super important tissue, right? And then it's also helping, you know, it's suspending the brain and the spinal cord. And when we think about our brain, it's, you know, the head is like 9 to 12 pounds, so super heavy to lug around all the time. Actually suspending that brain in a fluid makes it more buoyant and actually reduces the weight of what we have to carry around there. So that's an important aspect as well. Okay, that's it for the cerebrospinal fluid or CSF. Stay tuned for our next video, and as always, take care of yourselves and each other.